Hey everyone, today we'll be talking about the basics of algebraic chess notation, which if you've ever opened up a modern chess book or played a game online, you've probably seen this. Notation is an abbreviated way to write down the moves that make up a chess game. If you ever play in an official over-the-board tournament, you will most likely be required to write down the moves, so it's important to get comfortable with taking notation so that it's not a distraction for you, which we'll talk about the practical side of that at the end. But let's get right into it. Notation generally has two parts for each move, the piece that moved and the square that that piece moved to. The pieces are abbreviated with uppercase letters, so K for king, Q for queen, R for rook, B for bishop, and N for knight because K was already used for king. And then for pawn moves, you just write the name of the square that that pawn went to, and that will indicate that it was a pawn move. So you don't have to write a capital P. So for example, the first move of a game might be you move your pawn to E4, you'd simply write E4. And that brings us into the names of the squares or the coordinates, which for algebraic notation are made up of the coordinates that you get by using lowercase letters for the names of the files and then numbers 1 through 8 for the names of the ranks. And the board should always be set up in the same way. So white should have the square A1 in their bottom left corner, and then black will have the square H8 in their bottom left corner. So on a score sheet, you'll see that there are separate columns for white's moves and for black's moves. So for the first move, you'll write the first move for white, and then the first move for black, and then you'll go to the second move for white, the second move for black. So that is the very basic starting point for this, and you'll see that it's actually very similar to the way we talk about and verbalize chess moves. So for example, the knight moved to F3, knight F3, and F3 is just a very shortened version of that. Sometimes you'll have a situation where the same piece, for example, two knights, can both jump to the same square, and you have to specify which one. So we usually do that with the file that the piece is on. So for example, knight B D2, so the knight that was on the B file is going to D2. If those pieces are on the same file, then you'll use the rank number instead. So for example, rook 2 H5. To notate that you captured a piece, you use the letter X in between the piece name and the square that it lands on. So for example, knight takes E5. If you're capturing with a pawn, you'll use the letter from the file that it left, and then of course the square that it landed on. So for example, C takes D4. If you're capturing a pawn with en passant, you'll notate that the same exact way, but then you'll add EP as an abbreviation afterwards, so it's clear that it's en passant. For castling, you indicate that with O's. So if castling kingside, you'll write O-O, and if you're castling queenside, you write triple O's. If you are promoting a pawn, it's the same as a normal pawn move, except you add an equal sign and then the piece that you're promoting to. So for example, E8 equals queen. If a move is a check, you'll write the move, again, same as usual, but then you'll add a plus sign to indicate that it's with check. And then for checkmate, you'll write the move plus the pound sign. And that is pretty much all you need to know to be able to write your own notation. Now let's talk about what this looks like in an actual tournament game. So like I said at the beginning, notation is required for pretty much any official tournament that isn't like blitz or rapid time controls. And there are a few reasons for that. It helps prevent mistakes or cheating and gives you something to refer back to in the case of a dispute, so it's not just he said, she said. That doesn't happen very often, but in case you do happen to run into a problem, you'd rather have it than not, right? It's also important when you're claiming a draw. So in the case of a position on the board being reached 3 times, that is a draw by repetition. And so it's good to have your notation so that you can show an arbiter, yes, this position has in fact been reached 3 times. You'll often also have to turn in your notation at the end of each round just to signify that, yep, this game was legit and it was played and signed off by both players. And your opponent or the arbiter can call you out for not taking notation. And in that case, you'll have to use your own clock time to copy down your notation from your opponent's sheet. And you really don't want to have to do that. So there's really no getting out of it. In classical tournaments, you have to take notation. There are situations, and I would recommend checking with your federation for the specifics of this, but for example, if a player gets under 5 minutes, if either player is under 5 minutes on their clock, then both players can stop taking notation. I usually try to keep up taking notation as long as I possibly can, unless we're really getting into the time scramble of things, but it's good to have notation for your own purposes too. You want to take those games because you're spending a lot of time at the board playing those games, you're really thinking hard. You can use those for some really good analysis afterwards. And so you want to have as accurate and as complete notation as possible. So if you do have one of those games where you stop taking notation near the end because, you know, you're running into the time scramble thing, That's totally fine, but I also would recommend as soon as possible after that game is over to go back and try to record as much as you remember, just because, you know, a couple days later, you're probably not going to remember the specifics of, you know, that king and pawn endgame. So very practically, physically, you're sitting at the board. How does this all work? So you decide the move you want to make. You're going to grab that piece and move it or capture it. Put the piece down. I usually use the same piece if I've captured one to tap the clock. Set that down, grab your pen, write the move. That simple. And you do have to use just one hand to do all of this. So sit on the other one if you really need to, but you need to use the same hand to move the piece, hit the clock, and then, you know, set the piece down and do your thing. Especially moving the piece and hitting the clock, obviously there can be a bit of a disadvantage if one person is moving the piece with one hand and hitting the clock at the exact same time. It might just be a couple seconds of difference, but it can make a difference, and, you know, somebody could claim that. You can immediately respond to your opponent's move, and I think this most often comes up when there's like a really obvious, like, short series of captures right away before writing down your opponent's move. So for example, say black took back the bishop here, made their move. I don't have to write that move down right away. I can immediately take back, tap my clock, and then write both the moves down. But you don't want to do this for more than one or two moves. And so you can see, if you're not used to this, there's kind of a lot going on. There's a lot for your one hand to do, right? A lot of different motions. So I think it's good to practice doing this, especially if you're gearing up to go to an over-the-board tournament, just to sort of get in the flow of things. And so it's not so much of a distraction of every single move having to think, okay, I got to do this and this and this. It's just a little bit more natural. But for me, even just playing one or two games where I had to write the notation, you get used to it pretty quickly. But learning notation is a really great skill to have. Obviously, you'll be able to record your games when necessary or just when you want to. You'll be able to more deeply engage in chess books and, you know, read other score sheets, read about other games. And I think it really helps you to start speaking the language of chess. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have any more questions about tournament etiquette, things like that. I'd be happy to make more videos like this in the future. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you soon.